Yes, thank you, Asha, for the introduction in Hebrew, and thank you for inviting me. I'm a bit nervous to present our work in progress in that audience, but I will do my best, and I'm happy and pleased to be here in Jerusalem. Okay, thank you. Since 2010, Germany has experienced a previously unseen increase in public awareness regarding the problem of sexual abuse in childhood and youth. What happened? A group of adult men went to the public and reported that they were sexually abused when they visited a very popular elite Catholic school in Berlin, and they were abused by priests, and this report developed a huge mass media awareness. After that, sexual abuse was a topic, and especially in the 1970s and 1980s, adults reported that they were abused in Catholic elite boarding schools, and that was what Asha mentioned before, in a prestigious progressive education boarding school founded in 1910. There were more than 120 pupils who were sexually abused by the headmaster of that school, then in institutions by Protestants and in sports clubs. So this public awareness developed public debate, a debate first on certain types of institutions, such as children's homes and boarding schools. Are these, or make these institutions, children and young people, more or less most vulnerable for sexual abuse? Then we had a debate on certain pedagogic concepts. For example, there was a special principle, the so-called family principle, applied in progressive education boarding schools. We called it in German Landerziehungsheime. Then a debate on certain worldviews, for example, the Catholic sexual moral, and the purported sexual emancipation since 1968, because we have many adults who reported their experiences when they were in their childhood in the 70s and 80s, and a public debate on certain professional groups such as the Catholic Church with its codes of celibacy. What changed since 2010, since the public observed this challenge on sexual abuse in childhood and youth? What we can see, we have some, and I will talk about it in a few minutes, some new political strategies for dealing with the topic of sexual abuse of children and youth in families, and especially in educational institutions like schools or sports clubs. We try to raise some new empirical findings on victims as well as on strategies of offenders. We have new discussions on intervention and on prevention linked to the issue of the need for greater professionalization. That is an important issue in the German debate. How is the standard of professionalization of teachers, social workers, and so on? As well as on medical stuff. And then we have new research projects on approaches to and the effectiveness of prevention. So what really works if we try to prevent children and young people for sexual abuse? So what is the content of my presentation from now on? In the first part, I wish to address the political strategies on a national level. In the second part, I shall report selected empirical findings on the victims of sexual violence, and I will do this with a new study from my colleague at the University of Ulm. And in the third part, I shall consider the discussion on prevention concepts and the available empirical findings, while also drawing on our own research findings. And this research project is a work in progress, let me say. And so I will share our methods and how we try to find out what works within prevention programs. So let me come to the first part, political strategies on the national level. In Germany in 2010, since we had this public awareness and huge debate in the media, the government decided to set up a round table on child sexual abuse, and this round table was on a very high level, headed by the Ministries of Justice, of Education, and the Family. And the impact was that the round table with experts from several fields should, after working for a year or a year and a half, should give some recommendation. What should we do on the national level to avoid sexual abuse in childhood and youth? The second important strategy is that the Germans set up a post of an, we call it, independent trustee to deal with sexual abuse issues. This independent trustee was established within the Family Ministry and provided with the services of a group of expert advisors. One responsibility of this independent trustee is until now that he has to deal with several federations, with institutions on the national and federal level to make agreements, for example, with the German Sports Federation or the churches, and how to develop protective concepts. So one strategy is to make institutions responsible for protective concepts for the children and young people. And fourth, what we can see is another strategy led by the Ministry of Research. This ministry has allocated funds for research, initially in the health domain and then in the education. And it is also funding junior professors' posts at selected universities to meet the need for a greater degree of professionalization. And this is what I mentioned before, professionalization of teachers, of social workers, of kindergarten educators, and so on. One demand being discussed in Germany and throughout the world, as far as I can see, is the need for a thorough scientific analysis of all cases of sexual abuse and what happens, therefore, in Germany on the national level. First, the independent trustee brought up in 2010 a campaign. This campaign was a television campaign, and it was the so-called Breaking the Silence campaign. And this supported victims on several ages to report what happened to them when they were children and young people. And as you can see here, from this campaign, the independent trustee got more than 3,500 letters, a lot of telephone conversations with victims. And the main idea was, and that is, let me say, a motif of this national strategy, breaking silence breaks the power of the offenders. So that is what very often reported by adults, that they have to be silent, and there were nobody to willing to hear what happened to them. So we then have several reports on single institutions, 15 since last week, 16 reports on institutions commissioned by the Catholic Church. We have then 3 reports from the national or state governments, and one report commissioned by a progressive education school, the so-called Odenwaldschule, with this headmaster and 5 teachers as offenders. If we have a look at the international context, we can see the example Ireland. There we have 2 important reports. I guess you heard about it. The Ryan report, they collected more than 1,000 statements by witnesses. Then the Murphy report from 2009, which is focusing the bishopric of Dublin. So this is as well the Catholic context. And then we try to figure out if we could do something like the Netherlands did with the so-called Dietman report. This is a report in the Netherlands on a national level. And they sent questionnaires to 34,000 people in the Netherlands and ask for experiences in childhood and youth with sexual abuse within the family or in social or pedagogical institutions. In the US, we have this John Jay College of Criminal Justice, this report on the Catholic dioceses in the US. And there is an interesting study in Switzerland from the University of Zurich, the so-called Optimus study. And they it's a survey of more than 6,700 ninth grade pupils. And they as well surveyed child protection organizations in Switzerland. And what they find out in Switzerland was that girls, 21.7% of girls and 8.1% of boys reported being sexual abuse. So we have some international findings, and in Germany we discuss how can we come to a good and valued report and research on sexual abuse in Germany in the family and in several institutional contexts. So let me come to some selected empirical findings on the victims of sexual violence. As I said, since these adults reported that they were abused in institutions, the focus is more on violence and sexual abuse in institutions and less in families. But we all know that the family is the most frequent location for sexual abuse. And for example, if we have some research on children and adolescents in boarding, and not in boarding schools, in child care homes. These children often experience abuse in the family and then, for example, peer abuse in the care centers where they lived. What is not a single case in Germany, I think it is on an international level, the case that we have the dark figure of sexual abuse, and this figure is high. We don't know exactly how many people had this experience. And what we want to know in Germany is the question, what's about institutions beneath the family? So therefore, I catched the scientific evaluation of the National Telephone Hotline. The National Telephone Hotline is part of this campaign from the independent trustee, Breaking the Silence. And the colleagues from the Clinic of Child and Youth Psychiatry, they evaluate the first 10 months of this national hotline and try to find out who calls, who reported what they experience, and what kind of contacts are affected. You can see here who phoned. In the first 10 months, more than 4,000 people. the age range was from 8 to 89. On the average, the people who called were around 40. And 34% were male and 66% female who phoned. You can see here 66% of the people who phoned were victims. Then we have 16% who were close contact persons of victims, like partners, for example. Then we have 16% others and 1% of offenders who phoned to this national telephone hotline. When the persons called, they were asked to give some information on their personal situation, but it was voluntary, so we have not that high high sample for several information, but you can see here more than 2,000 who phoned gave some information on the family status, and you can see the variety. There were singles as well as married and divorced people, widowed, and persons who live with their partner. So I think the aspect of the variety is very important here for this, as well as the qualification of people who called and who were attacked when they were children and young people, that you can see here. And they also reported about the type and severity of abuse, and you get an impression about what they talked, what they experience, and what is important with respect to the fact of traumatization by what happened to them is if the abuse was once or several times or regularly and repeatedly. That is often the case if children experienced abuse within the family, and you can see this is 63.5% of the people who reported what happened to them. So what was from interest in Germany was the context of abuse, and you can see what is, I think, very similar to other national empirical findings. The family is the most important place for sexual abuse. 56.6% reported that they were abused in the family. But then we have more than 30% who experienced sexual abuse in institutions, like school, like kindergartens, like boarding schools or care centers, and only 5.4% were abused by strangers. Milieu, this means the close contacts of friends of the parents, for example. When we look at the 31% who reported they experienced sexual abuse in an institution, then they were asked which kind of institutions, and for the German debate it was very important to clarify the responsibility especially of the churches. The Catholic Church and the Protestant Church, and you can see 17% Catholics and 7.6 Protestants were affected in boarding schools and children's home. We have it's very similar, and by clubs and associations. Here we can see that sports clubs are very often a place where children and young people were experience sexual abuse, for example, by a trainer or another adult or older children. So this is just these are just a few insights in some new empirical findings from the German context. And now I will come to my third and final part of my presentation. What do we know and how can we focus on how we can prevent children and young people? And we have, I think, an interesting and challenging discussion on several prevention concepts and some available empirical findings. And first I will talk about some conceptual issues. What we know, not only from Germany, many prevention approaches are directed towards children, especially children in the age between 8 to 12 years old. But this is now subject to increasing criticism. So when in Germany prevention concepts started in the most of them started in the 1980s and 1990s. Then they focus only on children, to protect children and to deal and to work with children. But now prevention projects are tested that focus not just only on children, but on all relevant adults as well. That is parents, childcare staff, and teachers. And what we can see in particular, it is necessary to train adults in how to recognize the signs of sexual abuse and how to deal with a child or a young adolescent if they talk about their abuse, and what's about the intervention strategies. Do they know enough about intervention strategies? Do they have some support, from how they get the knowledge and what they have to do? Concepts also have to address what people need to know and how they should act when dealing with suspected cases of abuse. If we look at the goals for work with children, what do we know on a general level on prevention concepts? One goal is to inform children about sexual abuse. What is it? How can we clarify it with the children? Then discussing, recognizing, and explaining risk situations, how they can be avoided and potentially how they can be ended. Then a third goal is encouraging children to tell somebody about any potential experiences of abuse and to actively seek help. This is a good example how important it is to involve adults in prevention concept, because we know that children very often that children on an average have to tell 8 adults what happened to them before an adult believes what happened to the child. So this is extremely important to deal not only with the child, to deal as well with the adults. Then another goal is strengthening children's self-confidence in general and encouraging positive self-determined awareness of one's body. That is, in some prevention concepts or projects, an important goal, not in all, but in some. So I will come to one prevention project. We evaluate this project, and I will give you some information how this prevention project worked. The name of the project is My Body Belongs to Me, and it is an educational theater project that has been running for about 20 years throughout Germany. Our study is being carried out in a large German city, namely Bielefeld. Ascha knows Bielefeld very well. It's more or less not that interesting city, but but interesting people there, yeah. And the project has been running in all, and that is important, and that is a single case in Germany. The project has been running in all Bielefeld primary schools for the last 15 years. This means that all the children in the city take part in it, either their 3rd or 4th grade at school. The school project is funded by Saving Banks Foundation, so that is the reason why it works since that time. And the project participants in Bielefeld are an educational theater workshop, an advice center, and the police. So what we can see here, and what seems to be or what seems to have an effect, is a project, a prevention project, which is located in a communal network. So in several parts, the police, the prevention department of the police, then the advice center with professionalized therapists, social pedagogues, and so on, and the theater workshop or the theater group. This is an, let me say, a powerful communal network, and we can compare this with other less powerful networks in other communities. How it works? The theater workshop comes to, or two theater drama teachers come to the school. It's always a man and a woman, and they act out scenes for the children and then discusses this with the children. And they come 3 times during 3 weeks, and then they develop several issues on sexual abuse and disrespect. What is important, the children should learn several things, but they raised in every morning from the 3rd mornings 3 main questions. If a child comes to a situation which is not that clear for the child, they have to ask themselves 3 questions. The first question is, how is my sense, how is my feeling? Is it a yes or a no feeling? That seems to be seems to work with the children in that age, from 8 to 11. The second question is, do another person know where I am? And the third question is, do I get help if I need help? So, and they support children to ask in several situations themselves this question. Do somebody know where I am? Do I get some help? And do somebody know, for example, my friend, my father, my sister, and so on, where I am? So this just brief information how this single prevention project works. The topics of the theater projects in the drama situations, saying yes and no to adults, trusting strangers and people you know, what's about trusting them, good and bad secrets, who can I talk to about what, knowledge about sexuality and knowledge about sexual abuse. Let me come to our work in progress, our scientific evaluation. The current research project has 3 goals. It is funded by the Ministry of Social, Youth and Family in North Rhine-Westphalia. One goal is to evaluate the effect of a preventive program on 3rd grade children, so the children, they are 8 and 9 years old. Our evaluation method is a pre-post questionnaire for the children and a control group, and we also gain focus group discussions. Second, the survey to experience of teachers, and for that the following research questions were relevant for us. How do teachers view the prevention project? How do they integrate the project into their teaching in general? Do the children receive sex education at school? How effective do they think prevention is for this age group? And the survey method here is a qualitative interview with teachers, and as well here we have a control group in another city in primary schools. And third, to carry out qualitative interviews with mothers and fathers of primary school children. These pose the following questions. What are the fears of mothers and fathers? How do they report on sex education in the family? What sex education did they receive themselves? And do they have any personal experiences with violations of set limits and sexual abuse? I just come to a few results on the qualitative path. As I said, it is work in progress. We gained and collected all the data, but we are now analyzing the data, the qualitative and the quantitative data. Just a few results on the qualitative adult-oriented part of the scientific evaluations. With focus on parents, what we see in the interviews that mothers and fathers until now or today still have great difficulty in talking about sexuality at all, despite the liberalization of attitudes, and they have great difficulty in talking to their children about sexual abuse. So that is a huge problem in the family. The topic evidently triggers great anxiety, if not shame, and for many parents it may well bring back to mind their own unresolved experiences. We can see a similarity within the interviews with the teachers. For teachers, it is what we called and what we observed an inarticulatedness. So for teachers, it is difficult to put sexuality and above all sexual abuse into words. In the interviews, teacher did not address sexual abuse directly, but in a roundabout way. For example, by talking about when something like that happens or those sorts of things. So they didn't find concrete words. And as far as we know from research is that it is important to find concrete words, what happened, because it is easier for children and young people to talk to a professional, to talk to an adult who is able to mention and to put on what happened directly and with clear words. So these are only a few results from the qualitative research. I will come to our questionnaire. What we tried to do was we want to ask this 8- and 9-year-old children who experience this prevention project to take part in the prevention project. And therefore, we worked with the questionnaire, and we split the questionnaire in 2 parts. The first parts, after an introduction, the children were asked to fill out the questionnaire by themselves. And we have several domains. The first domain is the domain about you, then your class and your friends. So we focus more on at the beginning on well-being, classroom culture, school culture, and then we stay close to the theater project and the topics of the theater project. We ask for good and bad feelings in the pre and post questionnaire, saying yes and no, and people you know and strangers and secrets. Just to give you an impression how we deal with it in the questionnaire. This is the scale for my body belongs to me. For example, this one is maybe better, saying yes and no. So we ask the children, children have to do what adults tell them to do, and then they have 4 opportunities to answer, agree strongly, agree, disagree, and disagree strongly. Or if somebody touches you, it's all right to say no. And you can imagine that this is important to compare before and after the prevention project. So then the second part, we said stop to work by your own on the questionnaire, because in that part we start with the vignette and read the vignette. I will give you in a second the example, and then we read them how they have to deal with problems, and they can cross what they think about, talking about sexuality and about abuse, yourself, other children and adults, and then special questions for the second survey on the project, how they feel with the project, what they remember from the project, and so on. And this is the vignette we asked. It is a story about Luca. This is a name in Germany which fits for girls and boys, so this is good for both. And he has just turned 9 years old, Luca, and the following happens. At Luca's birthday party, Luca's 15-year-old cousin traps Luca in a corner of the kitchen and touches Luca between the legs. Luca doesn't want this and tries to run away, but the cousin doesn't let go of Luca and says, it's completely normal to touch yourself there, but don't tell anybody, otherwise we'll both get into real trouble. In any case, if you tell anybody, I say it's not true and nobody will believe you anyway. Luca doesn't want to be touched by the cousin in this way and is very frightened. What should Luca do? And then we give the children 13 options and read to them. Just to give you an example, Luca should not try to defend herself because the cousin is stronger, or Luca should say a loud and clear no. Luca shouldn't tell the parents because it's so embarrassing. And so they have 13 opportunities and to cross to response, yes. No, it's not multiple response. They could give several answers, what they think, what is right or wrong. So, and then we ask them, what do you think sexual abuse is? And there we give them several options, how children think about sexual abuse and what it could be. So this focus on what every prevention project tried to develop in the children's mind, that they have some knowledge about sexual abuse. No, we read it to them. In the second part, we read everything to them because of reading competence and in this age group. So let me come to some preliminary findings. We are still analyzing our data. However, we have some preliminary findings indicate that the program is in a way effective in following areas: knowledge about sexuality, knowledge about sexual abuse, and in some groups of children, changes in ideas about who has authority. So this part of say yes or no to an adult, if you don't want to do something what the adult wants to do, this is seems to be an effective part of this prevention program, and to recognize about the situation of Luca as well is something what seems to has an effect. As you can see here, these are some results on an average. We have some single results of special groups. In our sample, we had 30% of children with migration background. But this is on an average, and you can see the blue one is the first T1, and the red one is T2. I apologize, it's in German. The first column you see is I can trust my feelings if I want that somebody touched me or not. And here you can see a change from 1 to 2. Or the final one, the last column here is if somebody from the family will touch my breast, for example, then it can be, it's not good for me. So, and here as well we have some changes from point 1 to point 2. Let me come to a conclusion. What we know on this step of our project and compared to other empirical findings, which quality standards of prevention projects are important. It seems to be important that a prevention project is not only a single event for children, so it has to be contextualized in a prevention concept and in, for example, sexual education in schools. It has to be involved of adult caregivers. And what we observed since 2010 in Germany, there is a market. It's a big business to offer parents which are insecure what happened to their children, to offer them prevention projects and guarantee success. There's no guarantee of success. That is not a standard. Then it seems to be important that there are close ties to local advice centers, because there are the professionals who can also give support for intervention, for example. And important contents are for the, with respect to the children, is the question of guilt. Children have to know that responsibility lies exclusively by adults and not by themselves. And it is important that making children aware of potential offender strategies, especially in the internet and social net. That is an important case in Germany and not only there. And it seems to us that it is very important to give clear information on sexual abuse in that age group of primary school children. There are as well several prevention projects on kindergarten children, but here we have no empirical findings how it works. Thank you very much for your attention.